Hello and welcome to Read Brave, a comics podcast. I'm Vinton Bain.
I'm Cory Castoe.
So, Cory, what were we going to talk about when we started?
Look into my eyes, I can see the future. That is just my mind. And you're searching for the truth. Go.
Vinton, let me tell you what I've been reading this week.
Okay, what have you been reading?
I actually have been reading quite a bit lately. I've just gotten on one of those like benders where you just read, and
Benders. You've been reading Futurama comics.
pretty much, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I read 2 volumes of Harrow County, so that's roughly issue 1 through issue 8 or 9, I believe.
Okay.
It's written by Cullen Bunn, and it's amazing. It's like a horror comic set in around 1900, the turn of the 20th century, and it's about a witch. And I won't give away any more than that, other than you should check it out. The artwork is amazing. It's done in watercolor. That's just kind of my thing, you know. Like I really get excited when I see a comic book that's been illustrated in watercolor.
Yeah, it looks really good a lot of times when people do that.
I've also been reading a lot of Moon Knight. I read the first 2 issues.
Oh, that's right.
By-
You let me borrow the first 2 new issues
Right.
of the Jeff Lemire run.
Right.
It seems really interesting. I'm really curious where they're taking it. It doesn't make a lot of sense at the moment.
No.
It's kind of a crazy thing.
I'm really excited about it because I feel like it's in the same vein as the Vision series,
Oh, right.
that it's different and not your typical Marvel title, not your typical Marvel telling of a superhero.
Sure.
Because I enjoyed the first 2 issues of the Lemire series so much, I went back and read the previous series that was written by Warren Ellis, Brian Wood, and Cullen Bunn. And it had different illustrators for each author.
I never did read that. I always heard that it was really good, but I never got to it.
I enjoyed it. It was different because it seemed like that each issue didn't connect to the next issue. It was just a serial, basically.
Right.
But it was something different, something new. And there were a little bit of story arcs here and there. But I'm hooked. I'm sold on Moon Knight.
Yeah, it seemed like you were telling me last night that you've become a big Moon Knight fan now.
I really have. And, I've read some comments that were, disparaging about Moon Knight comics in general, but I'm really enjoying it.
Sure. I think he's one of those like C-list characters almost
Right.
in the Marvel universe. He's kind of well known. If you know comic books, then you know Moon Knight usually, but there's not many people that know Moon Knight and it can tell you that they've read a bunch of Moon Knight comics. I mean, 1, there's not a bunch out there.
Right.
And 2, it seems like anytime they give like a character like that their own series, it only lasts like 5 issues, and they're like, well, on to the next thing. That's canceled.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting because the main character is Mark Spector, although he has dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder.
Right.
And so that's another minority that Marvel is touching on, someone with mental illness. And 2, there's a lot of opportunity for interesting storytelling depending on which identity he is currently in. I know in one particular story arc I read today, actually, that while he was out trying to stop a terrorist blowing up a government building, he switched identity, I think 4 times.
Whoa.
Who he was at that time depended on what he was able to do and what skills he had.
Right.
So
That's really interesting because I thought maybe that was just a thing with the new Lemire series, but I guess that was something even before that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew of Moon Knight having read Marvel comics my whole life, but usually I only knew of Moon Knight showing up like random Marvel characters do in like a Spider-Man story or a Daredevil story. Moon Knight just shows up and he beats someone up. And I mean, in that small glimpse, you just think of him, he's just like a Daredevil Spider-Man type character. He just runs around rooftops hitting people. He's like, kind of like Batman, maybe.
Well, and he's from Hell's Kitchen also.
Yeah.
But I've always been fascinated by characters that don't often get their own storylines or don't get their own books, or when they do, they're very short.
Well, I mean, in the past, you've had characters like Hawkeye who get their own stories and they get canceled over and over again, but then they get Matt Fraction on it finally not too long ago here, and it becomes award-winning and everyone's in love with Hawkeye all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So it's great to see that happen, and I feel like that's kind of what's happening to Moon Knight now as well.
And I was surprised that the last run of Moon Knight, the writers were top-notch writers. I mean, Warren Ellis, who's done Transmetropolitan, Cullen Bunn, who did Harrow County, the one that I had mentioned before, and has done Deadpool before. He's done titles for almost every publisher, I believe.
Right.
All the main publishers, at least.
Sure.
And then, Brian Wood. So it kind of felt like the indie film put out by Warner Brothers or whatever,
Yeah, I'm into that. I need to check out more Moon Knight for sure.
So what have you been reading?
So I borrowed Ringside by Image Comics from you. Maybe.
Man,
I feel like it was like 2 months ago. I don't remember
a little
exactly.
while ago.
And it just kind of sat around for a while because I've been busy, and I usually borrow comics from you like a dozen at a time, and I'll hit one every month or so.
Yeah.
But I started Ringside yesterday and just powered through it. I couldn't stop. I was like, I want to know what's happening. They kept having those moments of suspense where the last page is just like has you on the edge of your seat, and then it's like, oh, it's over? No. But Ringside is by Joe Keating, I think is how you say his name. He's got an E at the end, so I'm not sure if it changes the pronunciation. With art by Nick Barber and Simon Gao, I'm going to say. Go?
I think that's...
something like that.
That's fair.
But it has really cool art. I love the colors scheme that they use, and some of the way they do layout is just really interesting. There's a scene where one of the characters is in this fight with all these guys, and it's having this flashback to him and the first time he's ever seen a wrestling match, which I should say this comic is about...
professional wrestling.
Yeah, it's about an ex-professional wrestler, Star, and it's kind of following him and something he gets caught up in, basically. And it kind of flashes back and forth between him and some of his buddies who are still wrestling.
Right.
And how the industry is heading, or their interactions with the industry.
There's a newcomer too, I believe.
Yeah, there's a newcomer that's working with one of his old buddies. So there's this scene where it's showing him getting in this fight, and it's showing flashbacks to what the first time he's ever seen wrestling, when his mom took him to a wrestling match, pulled him out of school basically, and was like, hey, let's go watch wrestling. And each panel is back and forth. So one panel will be like him staring at the ring, and the next panel is him staring at these people he's fighting, and it just keeps going back and forth in the flashback. And I just thought that was so awesome.
That was excellent storytelling.
So there's the 5 issues out now, and that ends of volume 1, but it just ends in another cliffhanger, and I just can't wait till more come out. But of course, the last issue says returning July 2016. Right. I'm like, no. So the thing that I was into this week is something that you got me into. So thanks for that. It was great.
No problem. Well, I grew up watching professional wrestling.
Yeah, me too.
And I just was bananas for it. And, so this, to me, Ringside combines the professional wrestling that I grew up watching with like the movie Drive.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
Ed Brubaker, like an Ed Brubaker story, like Criminal or something.
Yeah, it was a lot of nostalgia for me because I haven't watched wrestling in a long time, but I used to be really into it when I was a little kid.
Yeah, me too.
And I remember actually when I first got into comics, it was at my friend's house, and his dad not only had a bunch of comics that we would take and read, but he also would watch wrestling. He'd watch it like late at night, and we'd like sneak out of bed and go out there and just like watch, all the different iconic wrestlers of the late 80s, early 90s.
Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, the police officer, what was his name?
Big Boss Man.
Yeah, Big Boss Man. And then you had the 2 like twin clowns that would run around. Those guys freaked me out. I was like, I would not want to wrestle with 2 twin clowns running around the stage. I don't like that.
Doink.
Yeah, so that was a great one. So this past week was Free Comic Book Day.
Yes.
What did you do to celebrate Free Comic Book Day?
I actually hit up the 3 closest comic book shops to where I live.
Nice.
All Star Comics, New World Comics, and Empire Strikes. And every one of them had a little something different to offer. Obviously all the comic book shops have their own sales and promotions that they do. But at All Star, I was able to get a copy of the first comic that I remembered owning, the Spider-Man No More.
Oh, that's awesome.
I got the reprint of it for $1. So I was really stoked on that. New World, my kids always like going there the best because they have, all the people that cosplay as different characters.
Yeah, all the heroes dressed up from their Saturday superhero schools that they do.
Right. And then they have the local illustrators come and draw pictures on the comic book boards.
Yeah, and they just give them away for free to you.
Exactly,
it's really cool.
And then they have all the sales and everything. I got the first volume of Transmetropolitan.
Nice.
I had like 6, 7, 8, and 9, and so
Well, yeah, and you have to be careful because Transmetropolitan switched numbering. So
Right.
if you get the wrong ones, then they won't be numbered right, and you'll be missing issues.
Right. And then I went to Empire Strikes, and they had some local creators there.
Oh, cool.
And set up in their hallway outside the comic book shop. And I got Faith number 4 on Valiant Comics.
Oh, cool.
And then I got a Lumberjanes issue that vanished into thin air out of my collection. So so that was pretty exciting. But what I was most, out of all the free comics I think I got almost one of everything that was offered this year. But the one I was most excited about was Black Mass Studios' We Can Never Go Home.
Oh, yeah. I flipped through that, and it looked really awesome. I've been wanting to go back and actually fully read it. I flipped through all of them because I was helping out for Free Comic Book Day at New World. I stayed the whole 24 hours because they have a 24-hour sale. And he gave me the free comic books a couple days before so I could flip through them and know what to recommend to people for their different preferences. And so I flipped through that one, and it looked really cool.
I read Volume 1 a couple months ago, and I really enjoyed it a lot. It reminded me a lot of Deadly Class.
Oh, right. I love Deadly Class.
But it has like its own like teenage runaway, like a guy and a girl run away on their own combined with Deadly Class and combined with like superpowers. So it was exciting, and I was excited too that they had a free comic that day, and that Black Mass Studios had picked We Can Never Go Home as one of their stories to feature.
Yeah.
Of the free comic book day releases, which one stood out to you?
So, funny enough, Archie number 1. So I've never been an Archie fan, but this newer Archie 2015 version had Mark Waid writing it, and had Fiona Staples from Saga doing the art.
That is amazing.
And they did the issue 1. I'm assuming it was the full issue. They had, I think, a couple backup stories in the back. I'm not sure if the actual issue had those or not. But I flipped through that thing just because I love that author and I love that artist. And I actually kind of got into Archie. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I should read more Archie.
I was really excited about Mark Waid and Fiona Staples creating the new Archie. But then in addition to that, the new Jughead is written by Chip Zdarsky.
Oh, man.
Who does Howard the Duck and Sex Criminals.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
That is really cool. So, like I said, I was working at New World and taking pictures of all their costume people and suggesting comics to people. And I stayed there the whole 24 hours. And I got to say, that's a blast. If you ever have a chance to like go down and volunteer at your local comic book shop on Free Comic Book Day, it's so much fun just to hang out with those guys, build a relationship with your local shop and the people that work there and the people that love that shop and come and volunteer as well. It's so cool to just get to hang out and do that.
I would have to agree. I mean, I haven't personally done that myself, but I love comic books and I love the comic book community, you know,
Right.
and I really want to encourage everyone I meet and everyone that reads comics to break down that like stereotype of elitism, you know, that I've read this longer than you have, so you can't possibly be as big a fan as I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're all fans. You know, we all love reading comics, and if we have that in common, there should be no reason that we're not able to hang out together or work with one another or help one another out.
Agreed. So something else happened this weekend, aside from Free Comic Book Day, and that was Captain America Civil War came out. And I know I saw it Friday morning.
I did too. I worked until midnight, and then I went at like 8 o'clock in the morning to see it.
Nice.
And put toothpicks in my eyes to keep my eyes open. But actually, it wasn't that difficult to stay awake because it was an awesome movie.
Yeah. So I've actually seen it twice now, and I got to say, even the second time, just as good. But without saying any spoilers here, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was amazing. It was everything I wanted it to be. There were a few things that I was worried were going to happen in regards to the comic, but they changed some things to make it even better, in my opinion, than the comic. One thing that like I would have changed about the movie, I don't know if I would have changed it, but I wish I could have seen more done with Crossbones.
Oh, right.
I didn't feel like his part in the movie wasn't as full as it could have been, I felt like.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I wish that I could have seen more Ant-Man, more Spider-Man, and more Black Panther.
Yeah.
And more Vision, actually. But I wasn't really upset about that because I went in expecting to see a lot less of them than I did. They have a lot to go over, and so I understood that I didn't get as much of them as I wanted, but that doesn't mean I didn't want it more. I'm so looking forward to the new Black Panther movie that's coming out. I did not expect to be so in love with Black Panther. I've never really been super into him in the comics, but I was excited for him to get his debut in the movies finally, but I didn't expect for him to be like my runaway love of this movie. I mean, of course, I love Spider-Man. He's always going to be my first place, but Black Panther is like right up there next to him now.
He was awesome
in that film. So I'm really looking forward to the Black Panther movie. Really looking forward to Spider-Man Homecoming, which is coming out super quick. It's coming out July 2017.
Yeah, that'll be here before you even realize.
Right. So now if I can just get a Vision Scarlet Witch movie, that would be great.
Well, and I think we're long overdue for a Black Widow movie.
Yeah, I actually heard that they confirmed it's going to happen.
That's amazing.
Kevin Feige confirmed that the movie was going to be made. They haven't set out plans in stone, but he said in an interview, oh yeah, we're working on that actually.
That's awesome. I was really happy about the amount that Winter Soldier was in the movie and that he was an integral part to the story.
Yeah.
Winter Soldier is one of my favorite characters. Just even outside the movies, in the comics, Winter Soldier is one of my favorite characters. So I was really happy about that. And he's not a villain. He's never been a villain. He's just a victim.
And if you ever say he's a villain, Corey will fight you.
Yes.
I've seen it happen.
I have the bloody knuckles to prove it.
So that brings us to the segmented part of our show. And this first segment is called A Healthy Dose of Heroine. It's a segment about feminism and comics, and it's kind of a pilot episode for a podcast that Robbie Herlocker and Sarah Cade are wanting to start eventually at some point. You can hear more of Robbie Herlocker on Hamilton the Podcast from the Graphomania Podcast Network, and you can hear more from Sarah Cade on the Common Room Radio Podcast Network.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Cade.
And I'm Robbie Herlocker, and this is A Healthy Dose of Heroine.
This is a segment of the Read Brave Comics podcast where we're going to talk about feminism in comics and ladies in comics and female characters in comics, whether they're heroes or all too often the damsels in distress or the sidekicks or whatever. And we're just going to discuss why we have to kind of discuss this sort of thing. Why are we still having to have this conversation? It's 2016. Why are we still having to talk about how there are problems with the portrayal of women in comics? Robbie, why? Why?
I will not solve that in a 15-second segment.
Okay. Well, I think we have 15 minutes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
That's great. I am so much happier. I didn't prepare more than 15 seconds worth, so there we go. No, really, we found a lot of camaraderie when we were talking earlier this year about a lot of our main stories that we go to, that we love, are female-led. We identify with a lot of these characters because they're not... a lot of the times, they're not actually given to the toxic masculinity that they have. They have to be super tough guys, and they have to be, they have to solve every problem with their fists. You can have heroes that are actually compassionate and strong at the same time, but then you run into those problems you were talking about, and those tropes and those cliches about women who are just there to fill a void of being like the evil seductress, temptress, demonic person or something like that. Or all those other random tropes of, have you heard about the women in refrigerators?
I was literally
trope?
about to bring it up, but why don't you go ahead and explain it?
No, yeah. So basically in an older Green Lantern comic book, the whole motivation for Kyle Rayner to become this newly inspired character, this newly inspired Green Lantern, was they took his strong girlfriend and murdered her and put her inside of a refrigerator for Kyle Rayner to come home and discover her body there. And so he is actually motivated to move on in his life because this girl was nothing more than a plot device in a man's story arc.
That's absolutely terrible. That's the grossest and most grossly hilarious thing I have ever heard.
Yeah, it's a little bit tragic.
That seems really unnecessary. I feel like that there are less extreme ways to motivate a person, especially to become a superhero, but that's neither here nor there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. There are so many other storylines you could do. Like, you just care about the common good, or you like justice, or you're a good
maybe
person.
Maybe you want to, just save people. Maybe that's just your job as a superhero. Okay, Robbie, I'm going to ask you the dumb question so that our listeners don't have to feel like they're dumbos for asking this question. I'll go ahead and do that. What is feminism?
Feminism is nothing more than the belief that men and women are equals, both economically, socially, politically. It just means that you believe in the equality of the genders, and that regardless of where you fall on the gender scale, you are actually equal to someone of the other gender.
Excellent. That's good. So we are not going to be spending our time talking about how all of these male superheroes are terrible and jerks and useless.
Of course not.
I would like to be able to read a comic where a female superheroine or superhero, whatever, is drawn in a way that is not anatomically bonkers.
Right. So I was looking through a recent storyline throughout the 90s, and I was looking at some of these 90s comics, and they are absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I was looking through, and almost every single male character, when you have a cover drawn, they're in an action pose. They're about to punch somebody. They're running down the thing. They have their weapons drawn, or they're doing something. They're flying. They're doing something action-oriented. Women are somehow always in sexual poses almost entirely throughout the 90s. Now there are always exceptions.
Sure,
like occasionally.
yeah.
Most of the time, Gail Simone does fantastic work. She's brilliant. We'll talk about her in this throughout these segments as we go, I'm sure, quite a bit. But there are a lot of times when they were like twisting in such a way so that you could see the woman's front and her back at the same time, and that's they're completely objectified, completely sexualized, and just brought into this really unhealthy way. Like, any time that we are talking about how are women portrayed in the media, whether that's in movies, whether it's on comic book covers, whether it's inside of the magazine aisle at the store, we're having a feminist conversation. We're critiquing how genders are presented in the media. We're critiquing what types of heroes or heroines do we want our children to look up to? How do we want our kids to be actually, what kind of heroes do we want them to be looking for? And how do we want them to grow into a certain type of man or a certain type of woman? How should people view genders in these certain types of stories?
That's a very good point. And we had, this was a problem for such a long time. Or, I mean, I guess it didn't used to be a problem because for the longest time, comics were just for teenage boys. And so the way that you sold them was to be able to, sex sells and all this, which is fine. And I understand that that's like a fact of the universe. But I mean, come on. Like, I am a 28-year-old woman and I am growing to love comic books.
Absolutely.
I love superhero stories. I love comic stories. I am really growing to appreciate those. And I just want, when I have a daughter, I want her to be able to pick up any comic and like see like any character, whether it's a male or a female, not being objectified, but like being shown to like just be an amazing character and have amazing character qualities and all this kind of stuff. And I don't ever want to have to, I mean, it would be super nice if we lived in a perfect world and nobody had to feel like, their gender in either way, whether it's like the super action pose or the over sexualized pose, is being objectified one way or the other. And if we could just like focus on story and focus on character. And so we, I think with this show, are wanting to maybe kind of shed some light on some of that, not just some of the faults that we're seeing, but also a lot of the successes. And I think that we want to focus on that. And saying that, who do you think was your very first like favorite female superhero? Do you remember?
Man, that is a hard question. Well, my first encounter, I remember really falling in love with the Super Family. I remember as a kid, I actually was, like my friend Jared and I would go fly around the grade school playground taking turns being Superman. And so I went to the comic books and I actually started reading through. I fell in love with Superboy, Connor Kent, and I fell in love with, look at this girl named Kara, who also who's wearing the same shield on her chest. And so I wanted to see what her stories were like. And so I kind of read those a little bit. I wasn't mature enough to identify with a lot of the things that were happening in that story. I wanted to be Superboy at that point in time.
Oh, of course.
I wanted to be that kid who was like that. Now, when I go to those stories, I remember that one of the most meaningful heroes for me when it comes to what we're talking about right now has actually been She-Hulk in more recent years. Yeah, I love studying law. I love studying the way things work in the legal system. So I love like Daredevil and how he works on the law side. And then when law doesn't work, he takes things into his own hands. She-Hulk does a lot of things like that because she is a strong, confident woman. She is absolutely empowered. She is working and has her own storylines that are not necessarily dependent on men doing something in particular. So I adore all of the writing that I've seen with She-Hulk. It's just fascinating in general. So what about you? What is your introduction to female characters and female superheroes specifically?
Well, and this probably bears saying really quickly, I'm just now starting to get more and more into traditional comic books, by which I mean like the DC universe and the Marvel universe.
Right.
Before that, everything that I knew about comics came from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But when I was a very small girl, my first ever superhero was actually Sailor Moon. My dad was in the Air Force, and we lived in Japan whenever I was really young, and it was right in the early 90s when Sailor Moon became like a huge big deal. And so I was immediately introduced to this entire group of like teenage girls, all who had magical powers and were fighting off monsters and working together and being friends. So that, I think, was my very first introduction to a female superhero. And it was never, I think because I got introduced to that idea so early, it was never weird for me. I just always assumed like growing, and then I grew into into my love of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right,
Not
fantastic.
necessarily a comic character,
Right.
but definitely a female hero.
Well,
and
there are
one of
comics
the-
now. She is a
That's
comic
true.
character
Yeah,
now.
exactly. You're exactly right. And then some of the characters that I'm loving the most right now, I am obsessed with the Scarlet Witch. I just
Wanda.
recently read House of M and the Children's Crusade, and she actually has a new series out that's on issue 6. Will be the next one coming out, and she's basically like a
Yes.
supernatural private investigator.
Oh, I'm going to need to borrow those from you when you're
They're
done
in my
reading
car. I
those.
will let you borrow them.
Fantastic.
They're so good.
Great.
And also, Wonder Woman started with the New 52 Wonder Woman storyline, and
yes.
I'm loving that.
Yeah.
Loving getting because like I've always known about Wonder Woman. You know, it's that pop culture osmosis
Oh, yeah.
thing.
You see it around. see
But
her
I knew,
around.
yeah, exactly. But I knew nothing about her character, and so getting to know her and like seeing and getting to know Wanda Maximoff as well, and just seeing these women like be able to hold their own and be
Yes.
very powerful and all of that. And like I'm 5'2", 130 pounds soaking wet, right? So I have like I have no power. Okay, so it's
Right.
really great for
Well-
me to be able to look at like anyway.
Physical prowess.
Physical
Yeah.
prowess, right?
Oh, that's
I'm
right.
clumsy, whatever. I definitely do not have superpowers. So it is.
You could have fooled me.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So I really love being able to see these stories about these women who do have power and using it well. And
Yes.
well, Wanda went a little crazy, but I'm also kind of into that too. And so yeah, I think that Sailor Moon was definitely my first introduction, and I'm getting more and more excited as I'm going through and learning more and more about these characters. And I want good things for them, and I want everybody to be able to experience
Yeah.
that the way that I've experienced
Yeah.
it, and have like these female heroes that they can look up to and enjoy and be like, you know. And I think that we're going to use the word strong a lot. I think that
We
we're
will,
going to
for
end
sure.
up saying strong female character a lot. But really, I think what we just want are just characters that happen to be women,
Yes.
like written well.
Yeah, and I think that will, as we go through these and when we look at different particular story arcs in general, we're going to probably make a lot of comments on how they portray men and women in general.
Yes.
Because feminism is not just for women specifically. It's not just something that benefits the female gender. It is something that actually has a lot of benefits for both men and women. So if men are told that they have to portray one type of man for the rest of their lives, and they have
Right.
to live up to this strong type of person who is emotionally immature, who is unable to do these types of things, then they actually can give, like, they fall short of their own standard, their society's standards in general. And so we have this type of toxic masculinity that sneaks in to where they can't look at women in the right type of way. And so we want to be able to have these conversations in a way that we actually are dealing with gendered topics in a way that really is true to story and is true to culture, and actually pulls something out of the stories that really helps things connect to all of us in general.
I completely agree. And I think that it'll be really interesting being able to use comic books specifically, but then also some of these other, heroes heroines that we're going to see in other, other mediums, whether it's TV
Right.
shows, movies, whatever, but being able to see the history of that. And I think it'll be really cool to be able to use basically like nerd culture
Yeah.
to also talk about like gender roles and gender politics and stuff, because
Absolutely.
this is not something that I'm very well versed in, but it may turn out, and maybe some of our listeners will experience this too, that these are things that they already knew. They just didn't know that they knew it.
Yeah, you don't have to know the big words. You don't have to be an academic or a scholar in order to be in these conversations. We just have to have a conversation about, hey, what do you think of Wonder Woman's representation in this movie? What
Yeah.
do you think of Black Widow's portrayal on the screen? Like, what do you think of these types of conversations? Like, you all have an idea about how you feel about the way these people are portrayed. You all have an idea about whether you connect with this character or not. And we want to discuss, why do you connect with them this way? Why do you not connect with them in this context? And what can we do to make all of these characters, both the men and the women, specifically we're talking about the heroines in this series, what are we actually going to do to make them stronger? And so a couple of the tests we're going to look at as we go through some of this are like the Bechdel test. We'll talk about that in a future segment. We'll talk about the Mako Mori test. I want to end with just kind of asking you, what are some of your recommendations for if people want to go out there and read about some strong female characters in comic books? What do you recommend people look to?
I absolutely do recommend Wonder Woman. Brian Azzarello did the first 6 volumes of the first, I don't know how many issues it was, but I got them all in trade paperback, of the New 52 Wonder Woman. And it is problematic in some areas, but all stories are going to be problematic in some area or another. However, if you just want to see like Princess Diana of the Amazons, like just kicking ass and taking names and just being awesome, I highly recommend that. I also really do recommend the original Sailor Moon comic run. It's very, very different from Western storytelling. It's also super duper different from the cartoon, and my preferred like Sailor Moon intake way to do that thing. Definitely check out those new Scarlet Witch ones. If you enjoyed Lizzie Olsen in Age of Ultron and you're interested in that character at all, check those out because they're really good. What about you? What do you recommend?
Well, I recommend going and picking up the newest Miss Marvel trade.
Oh, I have that one. Maybe we can talk about that next time we get together, actually.
It's so great. And
excellent.
So you have a teenage girl who is looking up to her hero as a Captain Marvel in general. So she basically it's a coming-of-age story of sorts. And it's a young girl trying to figure out how to maneuver through the superhero world. And so, yeah, that's a really fun one if you're into superheroes. If you want to go another route, have you ever heard of Rat Queens?
I actually read the first issue of Rat Queens.
Okay, yeah. So if you love Dungeons & Dragons, it's basically a bunch of feminist girls making a Dungeons & Dragons team and going off into their own adventures, and it is so fun. It's exciting in general.
It's really, really funny. It's a really good read. You don't really have to know that much about Dungeons & Dragons to be able to read that comic, although if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you played some sort of tabletop role-playing game.
Right. So 2 other recommendations. One, this comes with a big disclaimer because not a lot of people will enjoy it, but Sex Criminals by Matt Fraction. It is absolutely a fun read, but you have to be okay with some graphic content, some sexual content. Weirdest premise for an entire story that I've ever heard in my entire life. So do you have an explicit level on this podcast? Yeah, so just Google the premise if you want to know. So it has a lot to do with sex. Anyways, the final recommendation I want to recommend is a little bit outside of of what we've been discussing so far, but we mentioned the Bechdel test. The woman who actually designed, after whom that test is named, Alison Bechdel, wrote a graphic memoir called Fun Home. And so it's basically a graphic novel of her own life. It's an autobiography, but she's a cartoonist.
Cool.
So she decided to articulate her entire life story.
Articulate?
Perfect. And so basically it's a story of her coming out to her family, and then her father tragically takes his life, or there's some questions about that. And so it's a tragedy, but there's some beauty in it, and so there's a lot of fascinating things. If you're wanting to kind of get into it, it's definitely more of the nonfiction side of comic books, which is a little bit strange, but they call it a graphic memoir. It's worth looking into. So that's called Fun Home. They made it into a Broadway musical, and it is fantastic. If you're into musicals, check that out. It's wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back next time, sometime in the future, with another episode of Healthy Dose of Heroine for you guys. And I definitely think that we should talk about Miss Marvel on that next one.
I think that'd be fantastic. I'm down.
Awesome. I'm Sarah Kane.
And I'm Robbie Herlocker.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
So this next segment, we talked to my wife, Scout Castoe, about kids in comics and how comic books are a great gateway to reading for kids.
Hi, I'm Vinton Bain.
I'm Scout Castoe.
I'm Cory Castoe.
And we're here to talk about kids and comic books.
Yay! So the first note I have written down is actually about Cory and I have a son named Elliot who is 9. He will tell you he's almost 10, which he will be in a couple weeks, and he won't let us forget it. He's always been our reluctant reader, which was a little bit of a challenge since Cory and I are both such avid readers.
We're both librarians, and so books are our life.
Yeah, they're pretty important to us. And so we made a deal with Elliot that if he read the entire collection of Bone comics by Jeff Smith, we made a deal that we would get him something special before the next school year started. And at first he didn't want to do it, and then he managed to read the entire collection in a very short span of time.
Elliot has always been a really, really big fan of comics. His birthday is just a few days after Free Comic Book Day, and so generally we celebrate his birthday by going to Free Comic Book Day, going to the Action Figure Museum in Pauls Valley, and then going to see whatever Marvel movie was released that weekend.
Right.
We've been lucky the last few years they've released a Marvel movie. Around his birthday in May.
Yeah, it's the typical time. But I have another friend who does podcasting, Josh, who you'll hear on this show, and his kid's birthday is right around that same time. So he says every year he takes him out to the movies. I was like, that's your child's birthday present to you.
Without a doubt, yeah.
So I really felt like that it would be easier for him to get into a comic book than it would be a regular book because he already has that love. And so we bought him the Bone anthology that was all the issues in one volume. It was like 1,700 pages. And
it's a brick of a book. It's big. It's more of a cinder block.
Right, yeah. And so he looked at it and his eyes got so big and I could just see like the overwhelming look in his eyes.
The doubt.
Right.
I can't do this.
And I said, you've got all summer to do this. And he started slow and he did finish it by the end of the summer. And at the end of the summer, he was reading much easier than when he started. He would try reading things that he wouldn't have read before. And he definitely got more into comic books because of reading Bone.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot due to comics that he's actually testing above his grade level for reading now, which is huge for us. So
Yeah, and I almost said that giving him a book that big is like this daunting thing, and you almost want to find the smaller volumes and, I'll get these smaller colored ones and he'll be more into it and then get into them that way. But after overcoming a book that thick, it makes everything else look easy. He always has that to look back on and go, well, I can read this thing because I read that thing and it's half the size of that.
Right. Handing him a small volume of something that's, 50 pages is nothing and he could do it in a day.
And he'll never have that feeling of that encouragement that I accomplished this big feat and I can do more now.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of studies done to show that comics are one of the best mediums for reluctant readers, that it eases them into reading, and providing visuals along with the text makes it more palatable.
Yeah, I've known kids growing up, especially like just friends of mine and their little brothers and things, that learned how to read from video games and comics. And it was because they kept seeing these visuals, and the visuals were all they needed. They loved the visuals, and so they play the video game or like flip through the comic, but they loved it so much they were like, I want to know what they're saying. And so they just like forced themselves to learn what they were saying and read what they were saying so they could know more about this thing that they loved. And I think that changes the dynamic. You hand them a book and they're not interested and they don't know what it is because they don't know how to read. But you hand them a comic book and they have visuals and they get pulled into it from that, and then they fall in love with it, and then they have a reason to push themselves to read. It's no longer you encouraging. They want to read because they want to know what Hawkeye is saying. They want to know what Daredevil's saying.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Cory mentioned I'm a librarian, which I guess is a fair assessment. That's what my name tag says. But I just work one day a week. I work in the library at a small private school. And when I went in, I had, I think, 2 kids in the middle school who would enjoy coming in and looking at books and checking out books and reading them. The entire rest of the school, which we're talking, it's a small school, but we're still talking about around 180 kids, were not coming in and checking out books to read. They use library time as time to mess around, social time, and get a break from the monotony of school, until I started bringing in graphic novels, and now I have a hard time keeping them on the shelves, especially for those 1st through 5th graders. The Amulet series.
Yeah.
Right. By
Kibuashi.
We did it.
I think that's it.
They love those books, and anyone, regardless of your age, I've read them all and I love them. And I know most of us do. They're really wonderful. So anyone, regardless of age, but especially if you have kids who are reluctant readers, I would check those out. I've had to order so many copies because all the kids are coming in wanting them, and not just wanting them the first time, but they're reading them over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I think that an interesting thing about comics for kids is the amount of women writers. And I mean, just because it's a woman writer doesn't make it good or bad, but every woman writer in kids comics are amazing. And like, for instance, Noelle Stevenson, who wrote Lumberjanes. Because of the strength and the success of Lumberjanes, she started to write for Thor, or she wrote the Thor annual, a story in the Thor annual series. And Kate Leth started writing for Hellcat this last year.
Yeah, I've heard that's been a really good series.
Yeah, which if you haven't read Hellcat or Lumberjanes, those are both really great series.
I love Lumberjanes, but I haven't had a chance to pick up Hellcat yet. But I've
been really enjoying it. Yeah,
one of my all-time favorite comic writers, regardless of what the what style of comic it is Faith Erin Hicks, and she definitely got her start in writing comics for kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mentioned our son Elliot, but we also have a daughter named Faith who's 11, and I would say probably her favorite author is Raina Telgemeier, which actually for her birthday last year we got her a signed poster from her
Comic Book Legal Defense Fund.
Yeah, and she lost it. She was so excited. But those are some more books I have trouble keeping on the shelves in the library. She wrote Smile and Sisters and Drama are all really popular.
And she's also
titles.
done a graphic novel adaptation of Babysitter's Club.
Yeah, which are really great.
And then Hope Larson is also a really amazing writer of kids and like preteen, teen comics. She wrote Mercury, Chiggers.
And she also did a graphic novel version of A Wrinkle in Time, which is really great.
I just really think that the comics that are written for kids, don't sell them short. They have amazing storylines. They're interesting, and they don't rely on being dark or being explicit to sell comics or to make it more interesting. And so I think in general, when you have a handicap, like with flash fiction where it can only be like 500 words, that only improves a story, you know?
Sure.
And so when you have the handicap of not being able to have, like I said, explicit scenes or violence or whatever, or really dark things or adult themes, that it pushes these authors and these creators and illustrators to make a better comic.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. We've mentioned here quite a few different authors who write kids comics. There actually aren't still that many if you compare it to the wide sea of comics for adults now. Comics have grown up. Back in the day when they first came out, comics were just for little boys, basically. That was pretty much the whole market. And it was like that for a couple decades. And they slowly grew up. And now the 80s hit it hard. But even today, we're having this influx of adult comics, all these comics specifically for people 18 and older. But I think the market really is kind of centering around the 15 to 20 year olds.
Right.
And so kids are really into comics, but they have a hard time accessing them because the parents will look through them and be like, oh, you can't read this. And oh, you can't read
which
this.
I just have to say, parents, don't sell your kids short.
Yes,
we've told our daughter, who loves to read, that we trust her. You know, I mean, obviously I'm not going to hand her a copy of Saga to read, but for the most part, we let her choose what she's going to read. And we've told her, you're smart, you're mature. If you see something you know you can't handle, if it's too scary, if it's too mature for your age, then put it down and walk away. And she's been really good about that.
Yeah, I've known 3 different sets of parents who have done that same exact thing. And I've heard the same story from all of them, which is that they let them choose and they know their guidelines. They're like, you know what's good for you and what's not. And every time that kid comes across something that's not, they will bring it to their parent and be like, this isn't for me.
She does.
I can't read this. I don't like, this isn't going to be good for me.
Right.
It's amazing that when you just give a kid his own autonomy like that, he'll use it for good. He's not going to ruin his own life.
Which we won't get into parenting advice, but just don't treat your kids like kids.
And don't sell your kids short on what they can handle. Give them the big bone compendium. Don't split it up and water things down thinking your kids can't handle it. They're capable of more than you think they are.
Yeah.
And I think where we're going in comics is really good. We're having this wide variety coming out, and I'd really like to see more kids comics, more of like the big companies, even like if Superman can do kids popular comics and stop being so dark all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Go back to a little bit more of that. And if in general, if the big companies can do comics for kids that aren't, oh, well, here's the baby X-Men. Well, they don't need to be. Just do a comic where they're not all having sex with each other, maybe.
Yeah. Well, although I will say the Scotty Young, the Avengers, what is it called?
Giant Size Little Marvel.
Yeah.
Was
Man, they're so
comic.
fun.
Yeah, that's not the undersell the ones.
Yeah, our kids love them, and they make me laugh so hard too.
Yeah, Scotty Young does a great job.
Yes.
So I think that, just in closing, that there are a lot of great kids comics out there, and there are a lot of comics that can be accessible to kids if you allow your kids to read them.
Yeah, and if you don't know what to get your kids, then go to your local comic shop. They would love to help you pick out some things that your kids would most likely really love, even based on their interests that they already have, what toys they play with or whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of comic shops will actually have a specific shelf or a wall or a section that's just kid-approved comics.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about specifically comic book shops and the people that run them and own them is they're there for you, and they have a great knowledge of everything in the shop, and they know what kids like.
And if you hear about something that they don't have, they'll almost always be willing to order that thing in for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of them have special events. Like we have New World here in Oklahoma City, and they do superhero schools on Saturday where they have people dress up and they tell the kids about superheroes.
Yes.
And it gets them into comics even more and helps them to learn to read from that, because then they have a visual to go along with it.
Definitely.
So get your kids, get them comics, and read and have fun.
And read with them.
Read
Read with
together,
them.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That is all. Speaking of kids who read comics, our last segment today is an interview with 3 kids about a graphic novel that they read. Jazlyn and Journey are twins, age 12, and Faith is age 11. Cory Castoe moderates this discussion.
Okay, we're here today with, do you guys want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jazlyn Flame Hancock. Faith Castoe. Journey Hancock.
And we are going to talk with them about a graphic novel that they all read. What was the graphic novel?
Howtoons.
And who is it by?
By Fred Van Lente.
Awesome. So, Jazlyn, what did you think of the book?
I liked it. It was nice. That's all I have to say.
It was nice, okay. Journey, what did you think?
I liked it.
You liked it? Faith, what about you?
I really liked it, and like how it was like written, and like how you like how it was a surprise of who was like keeping all the parents and hiding them.
Can you guys give me like a brief synopsis of the book? Like tell me what it's about, like what happens?
Well, the planet is being polluted by just civilization, and these really dumb people decide to blow up a bunch of volcanoes. I can't really remember why, but it was like to get rid of pollution.
Okay.
And so these people have to go underground and try to survive if anything happens to civilization. I don't know. I guess that's what I got from it.
Who are like the main characters of the book?
Tuck and I can't remember her name.
I don't know how to pronounce that. I think it's that Celine or something like that.
Celine, that was it.
Celine and Tuck.
So the boy's name is Tuck.
And the girl's name is Celine.
Jazlyn, what did you like about the book?
The Journey and the 2 characters.
Okay. Journey, what about you? What did you like about the book?
I liked how it told you how things worked and how to make them.
So, on this particular book, something I noticed that was different, and Journey, what you were referring to was that along with the graphic novel, it showed you how to make stuff. Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What kind of stuff would it show you how to make?
Well, there's this like bottle rocket thing, and you use a plastic soda bottle, and then you use like this paper airplane kind of thing.
And tubes.
Yeah, and tubes, and you put it at the end of the tube, and you just like stomp on it, and it blows out.
That sounds awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And they show you how to make a marshmallow gun, a goggles protector, and they show you how to make a little go-kart thing.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty awesome.
So, maybe I already know the answer to this from your last answer, but did you like that they showed you how to make things, or did you think that it was distracting and took away from the story?
I really loved it because then, like, you're sometimes wondering how people in graphic novels and comics, you wonder how they made that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really helpful and good that they showed you how. Really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
I found it kind of hard to get through, though.
Really?
And try to get to the story, but I would skip when they were all saying, like, what bolts to use and stuff.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. This graphic novel is an ongoing series, and this is like one one story arc from that series? Would you read more stories in the Howtoons?
I would love to.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Yeah, I liked it, so I would read it if I had the book. I would like to. Yeah, I liked it a lot.
Would you recommend this to other readers?
Yes, I would. If they were if they wanted an adventure story thing, I would definitely recommend it.
Awesome.
I know a few people who might like it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Was there anything about the book that you did not like? Anything that you would have changed if you were making the book?
I would change of the thought. They would show the thoughts of the characters more. You
Really?
know?
Okay.
I was happy with it. At first I was a little confused on the ending, and then I realized what was happening.
So you thought the ending was a little bit unclear, but you understood it
Well,
at the end.
at first it's unclear, and then when you read through it, it makes more sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Tell me about your experience with comic books. Do you guys read comics often?
I read a lot of graphic novels.
A lot of graphic novels. Okay.
Same here.
Yeah.
I read comics like Bee and Puppycat and Lumberjanes, but I think I'm more reading graphic novels than comic books
Okay.
currently.
What about you, Journey?
Yeah, I would like to more than I do, but sometimes I don't really get to read comics as much as I wish I would. But I like reading them, and they're fun, and I've read a bunch of graphic novels before too.
Awesome. Well, what are your favorite comics to read, or your favorite graphic novels to read?
Mine at the moment is Amulet,
Amulet?
by... God, I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's
Kazu.
Kabushi?
Close enough.
I don't know.
What about you, Faith?
I really like to read Bee and Puppycat,
Uh-huh.
like how they make the volume 1 with all 1 through 12 comics or something like that.
Right, yeah.
You know, I find that very enjoying, like Lumberjanes, you know.
Yeah. That's called a trade paperback, when they get 5 or 6 comics of one story arc, and they put it in one book, so you can read all of them at one time, together, you know?
Yeah.
Can I change my answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
I pick Miss Marvel.
Miss Marvel is your favorite?
Yeah.
Mr. Marvel's a good one. What about you, Journey?
I like Miss Marvel, and I read a couple of Lumberjanes. I haven't read that much though.
Mm-hmm.
I like those two. I like Amulet as well.
So, do you think that there are girls' comics and boys' comics? And if so, do you think there are enough comics out there for girls? Or do you wish there was something different about comics? That there were more of this kind of story? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think there are definitely comics for girls,
Mm-hmm.
and there are definitely comics that girls might not be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I would change anything, because I feel like it's a very anyone can read anything world. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
That's cool, yeah.
I would say I feel the exact same because, some guys and boys think that girls can't read comics just because they're girls.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally don't believe that because I believe anyone can do anything, it doesn't matter if it's a girl's or a boy thing or what anyone else's opinion is. It's just your opinion,
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Journey?
I think they're right too, but I don't know. There's a lot of comics that would be interested to a bunch of different people, and it doesn't really matter if they're boys or girls.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of comics would you like to read? Or if you have a favorite comic writer, what kind of comics would you like that writer to write?
I would like Faith Erin Hicks and Hope Larson to just write a book together.
Yeah.
About a couple of girls that are over at a sleepover or something like that, at a camp. And they find out this mystery and they're trying to solve it and stuff. and I believe that would be really good. So
That sounds awesome.
I not really sure. Like, there was a ton of comics out there, and but I like the Batgirl comics, but there's a lot of superhero comics, and I would like to see it maybe develop into a little, I don't know, something else. I mean, I love superheroes, and but
So you like to read more comics that are not superhero related?
yeah, I just feel like they were all like, if you go into a comic book store, I was noticing this, they're all a ton of superhero comics, and I know that's what they're known for, is being superheroes, but it would be nice to see maybe something else a little more original. That's just my opinion.
Sure. Are there any comics that you would recommend to our listeners to read, or you would recommend to other kids your age to read?
like I said earlier, Van Puppy Cat, Lumberjanes are very good ones, I believe, for girls and both boys,
Okay. Is that a good, would those be good comics for someone that didn't read comics? A good place for them to start would be Being Puppy Cat and Lumberjanes?
Yeah, I feel like that would be a very good one.
What I basically started on was because my sister had always, and so I would read them with her. Is Batgirl Year One?
Okay.
Which I think is a very good series.
Journey, what about you?
I think Amulet might be a good one for people to start off
Yeah.
at, because it kind of like is a good one to start off at. And there's Batgirl, and there's a bunch of ones that you could start off at, but I think Amulet is a good one.
Awesome.
I think there are very many comics that you could start off with, you know, because there's tons of comics out there, but there's also a lot of comics that would be good to start off with for a new person, you know.
Yeah.
for-
In closing, give me like a one sentence about the book. Your one sentence review of the book.
Exciting.
Exciting. Okay, great.
Adventurous.
Adventurous. Okay.
Adventurous and exciting is very good. Courageous.
Courageous. All right, great. Well, thank you for coming to our podcast today and talking to us about Howtoons Reignition. And that was by Fred Van Lente, is that right?
Yes.
And illustrated by Tom Fowler.
Yes, and Jordy Belair.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys.
Sure thing. Very glad to be on here.
So that brings us to the end of our show today.
Vinton, do you have any comics that you would recommend I read this week?
Yeah, actually, in preparation for the upcoming Doctor Strange film, and anyone out there listening who wants a comic book to prepare them for this film coming up, I would highly recommend Doctor Strange The Oath by Brian K. Vaughan. It is kind of an origin story, but more of like the past coming back to haunt you type of story. So it touches on his origin, kind of tells you everything about who Doctor Strange is, and then it's just an amazing story. And it features the Night Nurse, which, if you only know the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was introduced in Daredevil Season 1. What about you, Corey? You have anything that I should read?
I would recommend reading Pop Gun War. Image Comics re-released Pop Gun War by Farrell DeRimple this last Wednesday. I would recommend reading that, as well as Moon Knight, that we talked about earlier, and then Worst X-Men Ever by Max Bemis from Say Anything.
You think I didn't already pre-order the re-release of Pop Gun by Farrell Dalrymple? Because I did.
I must not know you very
and
well.
I'm going to reread it as soon as I get it, because I've read it a long time ago, but I'm excited about this re-release. Actually, really stoked about it. I pre-ordered it. It should be shipping day one. They said it will be arriving day one on Amazon, so I'm stoked about that.
That's it.
But I need to check out that older Moon Knight series you were talking about. I'm really looking forward to that.
It's awesome. You'll enjoy it.
And I read the first 3 issues of Worst X-Men Ever. It's an interesting story. I was pretty excited when they announced it. I always loved the X-Men, and I like new takes on things like that. So
Definitely. And, the first 2 are kind of like they're a little sad,
Yeah.
if we're being honest.
One of the first panels in there is like one of the saddest panels I've ever seen in comics.
Right. But this, the third issue that recently came out, it has an upturn of a lot of positivity.
That's going to do it for our show today. If you'd like to contact us, you can send us suggestions or questions through email at contact@graphocast.com or on Twitter @graphocast, GRAPHOCAST. And my personal Twitter is Flesh Eater.
My personal Twitter is Corey Lee himself.
So hit us up. We'd love to talk to you about comic books.
Thanks to the Scurvies for letting us use their music. You can check out more of the music at thescurvies.bandcamp.com. And thank you for all the contributors who added to our podcast today.
And thank you for all of our Patreon contributors. If you'd like to give toward this podcast and all the other podcasts on the Graphomania Podcast Network, check out patreon.com/Graphocast.
You'll be glad you did.
Until next time, I'm Vinton Bain.
I'm Cory Castoe.
See you later.
Excelsior.
Excelsior. This has been a Graphomania production. If you would like to hear more podcasts, go to graphocast.com, GRAPHOCAST.com. Follow us on Twitter @Graphocast and like the Graphomania page on Facebook for news and updates.